Okay, let's talk about what I do for some specific centers. The ones that I'm really proud of are my texture centers in first grade, and I want to show you how I teach those. Now, basically, we would start off with just a regular weaving lesson. How do we do a paper weaving? Paper weaving is really tricky. It's frustrating for a lot of kids, but that over, under patterning is great for fine motors, and it's also great for figuring out how to put things together in a more interesting way. So we would always start with just doing a basic paper weaving together. Okay, yes, we fold our papers. Yes, I make them measure and cut themselves. If they make a mistake, get a new paper and we try it again, because remember, I do not give up. We would start working with just basic paper weaving. Now, last year I also did this with my second graders, and my second graders cranked it up a notch, and we made overlaying stripes that had different patterns and really jazzed it up using neon paper. We did this in one class period. It was a really great way for them to get the mentality of that over-under patterning for weaving. Now, after we learned that, we would start to scaffold into what does it look like to sew and what does it look like to weave. So I would have 2 stations that day, and I would have them in really long tables so that they could really spread out and have lots of materials out at their disposal. One of those stations would be trying weaving in a little bit different way. And here's how I would do that. I take a cardboard loom and I give them rubber bands. And now I know you're supposed to warp these with yarn, but that's really hard for little fingers, especially for first graders. So what I would give them is I would give them rubber bands instead, so that you could just loop your rubber bands on here and you would go ahead and make your warp lines using rubber bands. Now, when we do this in my classroom, yes, rubber bands get popped all around the room. Of course they do. We don't make a big deal about it. Again, they're kids, they're gonna be goofy, they're gonna do things they're not supposed to. We just redirect them like we do at any other point in time, right? Now, I have these super fancy looms that have the little notches in them. I also like to use just use plain old pieces of cardboard that have been cut. If you've got really loose rubber bands, just pull them taut on the front side and it still should work just fine for what we're trying. Now, what I do is I cut a bunch of just little pieces of yarn and ribbon for them to weave with, and I put a big mound of it on the table. And at this station, all they're gonna do is they're gonna practice that over under motion that we did when we did our paper weaving, but instead they're gonna go over and under rubber bands. Over, under, over, under, over, under. Pull. Then they get their next string and they go over, under, over, under, over, under again. Now, I really like the way that these turn out, because if they do them completely full, they're gonna make a really awesome pattern. I also really like doing this activity because it doesn't matter if they do it incorrectly, the rubber band is gonna hold it in place. When they're doing a regular weaving, especially if they have like a popsicle stick or a plastic needle or even a paper clip, if they go the wrong direction, it undoes what they did or it gets tangled. This is a way to kind of alleviate that if you're using rubber bands. So one station would be doing this. The other station would be doing lacing cards. Now, I think lacing cards are a really great way to introduce sewing to little kids. It gets them in the habit of how we do that up-down stitch instead of looping like a whip stitch. I like my kids just to learn the basic stitch at this grade level. When we get into 3rd grade and we start digging a little bit deeper into weaving patterns, then I will start to teach them some other ways of looping things. Especially when we start getting into sewing, I will teach them the different kind of stitches. I will show you that in a second. But at the lacing station, all they're doing is learning this method of up, down, up, down. Now, inevitably, somebody is gonna be a looper and is gonna do this where it loops around the edge. All we have to do is, because they'll get upset, all we have to do is pull that loop out and then try it again. Once they get all the way around their card, they take all of their string out, they get a new card, and they try it again. Now, this is monotonous, but I feel like weaving is monotonous and sewing is monotonous, and it's part of learning how to do it is getting in the rhythm of what it looks like to actually do this up-down motion or this over-under motion. So that would be 1 week that they would try both of those things. The next week, we would try 3 more stations. One of those stations would be texture rubbing. Now, texture rubbing is a super simple activity. Of course, in kindergarten, we're going to teach them how to rub on texture plates, right? One thing that I like to do is give them a sheet that has a bunch of shapes on it so that they have to have it concentrated into one area. That's a little bit harder skill. Of course, we also experiment on the back with texture rubbing. That first week, that's all they would do is just practice learning how to rub their texture at that one station. The next station would be crumple collage. Yes, that's what I call it, crumple collage. Crumple collage is where we crumple up little squares of tissue paper and stick them. Think like homecoming floats back in the day where we made those big, scratchy, stick them in chicken wire. That's what this is, except we're dipping it in glue and then we're sticking it on. Dip in glue, stick it on. So that all of these little pieces are crumpled. It gives it a really cool texture. Wait till you see what some kids make out of these. They can make some amazing things. But again, when I'm introducing it in centers, we're going to do a collaborative. So last year we did the alphabet. When a letter was finished, I gave them a new letter and they kept on going. It was learning that process of crumple, dip, stick, crumple, dip, stick, because then you can start making some really creative things. So let's see. We've talked about weaving. We've talked about lacing cards. We've talked about texture rubbing. Let's talk about crayon resist. That's the other one. Some kids don't want to do these tactile things. Some kids want to just draw and paint. So one of the things that we do is a crayon resist drawing. They went in, they drew their animal, they added lots of patterns and textures, and then they're going to go back over on top of them and they're going to paint with watercolors in a watercolor resist. I love these. I don't think they have the same texture of other texture projects like weaving, using yarn, using crumpled paper. But I think this is a great option for kids that want to paint and draw still. Now, once they have tried all of these things, they've tried sewing on lacing cards, they've tried weaving using yarn, they've tried texture rubbing, they've tried crayon resist, not to that level, but they've tried crayon resist, and they have tried sewing, weaving, texture rubbing, crayon resist, and crumple collage. Once they've tried all of them, then I give them the chance to choose one that they want to spend more time on. And I give them 3 class periods to work on one. That's right, 3 class periods. I know that's a lot of time to commit, but I feel like making a really good piece of art, making a piece that you're proud of and you want to present, takes some time. So I give them time to do that over 3 class periods. So then they choose what they want to do. Now, some kids are going to be stuck at that bottom level of what we practiced, but some kids are going to fly. And those kids that fly, I'm going to push them a little bit farther. Okay, so let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's go back to texture rubbing. Okay, remember when we did texture rubbing in stations, we just were practicing how to get a clear texture using our rubbings, talking about holding your paper still, pushing down hard on your crayon, that sort of thing. Then we kind of build. Some kids want to draw their own pictures and add their textures inside of their pictures. Some kids want to do some collage work and they will texture rub a bunch of pieces of paper and then turn their pictures into collages. I love this idea. I think it's creative. I think it's outside the box. And we really get into that envisioning idea. This is what I want to make. How can I incorporate this texture rubbing idea into an outer space collage? There's a way to do that. This is a great option for kids that want to do texture rubbing on texture plates. Kids that are weaving, some kids are going to get stuck with the rubber band looms. That's just where they're comfortable. It's taking them a really long time. That's great. Some kids can start doing ones where they actually use a bigger weaving loom and they use a plastic needle to do it. I also like to give kids the opportunity to use the big loom. I'm fortunate enough to have a big friendly loom where kids can actually work on a larger scale. I would either give them really thick ribbon or some sort of bigger, wider yarn so that they can actually see their progress a little bit faster. Again, that one would be more of a collaboration than anything else. I also like to do that on hula hoops. I get the old hula hoops from the gym that have been like dented that no one wants to hoop with anymore. And I warp those and I let them start practicing doing circle weaving on those. The other thing that I really had a lot of success with last year was doing rainbow looms. Okay, this is just a paper plate that was cut in half, and I use the Chinette ones because they're really thicker. And my kids did the same concept that they did with that, with the little cardboard loom, except this time they're warped with string. You could still warp them with rubber bands. I warped them before they came in if they were doing this project. And they had extra long strings. So they made really cool rainbows, and then we stuffed it with bunting batting from like quilt batting to make the clouds. The kids loved these, loved them. I love the idea of giving them a weaving center though, because they could opt to do another paper weaving. They could opt to do a yarn weaving. And when I see they're being really successful, I'm gonna bump them up to working on one of the collaborative ones where they can really see the effect of making something large scale, either on the friendly loom or on the hula hoop loom. Again, that takes a lot of front end work to get all of those things warped and ready for kids to weave on, but I love giving them the experience to see that weaving is not just a flat piece of paper, that there's lots of different options with weaving. Let's talk about crumple collage again. You'll remember when I just told you about crumple collage, we were doing collaborative letters. These are very simple shapes to do. Some kids are ready to make their own crumple collages, and I have had a lot of success with first graders making really, really incredible ones. What I encourage them to do is draw something that has basic shapes, and if they're not confident in it, I'm gonna draw it for them. So one year, I had a kid that wanted to make a rainbow. Of course, kids love rainbows. So I helped her, and we drew off the rainbow, and this was her crumple collage at the end. You can see it is almost completely full. There are still some little holes in there. Again, this is because it's been in storage. Lots of little pieces have fallen out, but you can see it has this tremendous, awesome texture on top of it. It's such an amazing piece of art that is so different than what anybody else makes in the art room. I love when kids choose this one. It's very time consuming. So I suggest you make them smaller than this. This one was a beast to make. She ended up having friends that helped her. But this is a great project that kids really remember and connect to that word texture really easily. The last one that we do is the sewing station. Now you'll remember that we taught them how to do it with lacing cards. When kids are ready to try past that, and I start pushing them a little bit farther, that's when we start getting into things like this. Now, you could use something like burlap. I'm not really sure what these are called. I found them in my closet. They're kind of papery, but I sealed the edges with tape, and you can just see that these children have just been making stitches and pulling beads into their stitches. That's kind of the next thing in the scaffolding. I also like these because you can draw on them. I've been using those plastic canvases because I was gifted several boxes of them. And you can draw on those with a permanent marker also. I would just draw lines with Sharpie, get them to follow the lines. When I can see they do that, oh, here's a cup of beads. Try adding some beads into that. Let's try making a shape. Once they're comfortable with that, then we can start turning them into pictures. Yes, a first grader stitched this last year. I was really proud of it. We drew the shape that they wanted to do, and then they spent their time stitching using plastic needles and yarn. Now, this one is a little bit difficult to monitor because they cannot tie their own knots. When they get into the upper grades, I teach them how to thread a needle and tie the knots themselves. First graders really need help with this. It's going to keep you on your toes, but it's going to keep your kids really, really excited about sewing. And that's what this is all about for me. Now, another little way that I've done it in the past is I've bought these little plastic hoops, and I've bought that webbing that you put in the bottom of shelves, like shelf liner, but it's kind of thicker and rubbery that I get at Dollar Tree, and you get it on a roll. I've cut that and put that into these, and that makes a really great place for them to do also. The point is you want to have something that has a really loose weave so that they can see the holes. If you're going through fabric, they can't see the holes, and those big plastic needles aren't going to go through them. Last year, I also had a sewing club after school, and this is what we started with, okay? Teaching them some different kinds of stitches. Like we've got running stitches, we've got side-by-side stitches. And I was teaching them how you can fill up a space by using long stitch to fill up cards. This is that plastic canvas that I was talking about. Now, what do I do once we have all of these things? Everybody's working on something different. Yes, I make them stick with what they started. If they want to start a new project, they have to complete the one before. The expectation is that in those 3 class periods, everybody has at least one finished piece. Some people are going to be speedy and they're going to finish one every class period. Some people are going to take all 3 weeks. Some people are going to fall in the middle. That's okay with me. As long as they have one finished piece to present at the end, we're good to go. The last thing that we do is on that 4th week, after we have finished our pictures, we hang them up in the classroom and we have critique week. Now, Critique Week does not look like it did in college. It is not harsh and soul crushing, telling you all of the problems that you have with your artwork. It's a time for us to build each other up as artists. So every kid gets an opportunity to get up, pick a piece of art that they really love that a classmate made, talk about what they loved about it. I want to hear why you like it, and I want to try to use vocabulary words, color, texture, line, pattern, all of those things. It sounds really scary, and for some kids it is. For some kids, I really have to kind of dig deep and ask a lot of questions to get them to talk. But for the most part, the kids really love getting to give each other compliments. They love getting to see everybody's work displayed. And the way that I display it, I just hang up a clothesline and I clip them on the clothesline. As soon as we're done, I pull them down and I give them to the kids to take home. Some kids really want their artwork on display, so I always give them the option. Do you want this to hang in the hallway, or do you want to take it home today? Whatever their answer is, that's the answer. That's how I'm incorporating choice in my classroom. I'm giving them the experience to explore and try a bunch of different things, and then I'm letting them choose where they land on